The wind whispered through the narrow alleys of Brooklyn, carrying with it the scent of old bricks and forgotten memories. In a city that never truly sleeps, amidst the hum of life, some stories quietly slumber, waiting for their moment to awaken. Hannah Williams never believed in ghosts, not the kind that lurked in the shadows of the night, at least, but the past. That was a ghost no one could escape. It had been 15 years since her father, Thomas, passed away. 15 years of unanswered questions, of a hole in her heart that nothing seemed to fill. Tonight, as she rummaged through a box of old keepsakes, the ghost found her. It wasn't in the form of a phantom figure or a flickering light, but something far more tangible. A letter, yellowed with time, tucked into the bottom corner of the box. The handwriting was unmistakable. Her father's. Hannah held her breath, tracing the edges of the envelope with trembling fingers. The return address caught her eye. Windmill Creek, Pennsylvania. A place she'd never been, a name she'd never heard. The words inside would set her on a journey she never expected, a journey that would challenge everything she thought she knew about her father, her family, and herself. And so, as the Brooklyn night grew quieter, Hannah opened the door to the past, not knowing the shadows it would cast on her future. Brooklyn, New York, was always alive. The streets bustled with purpose, the air thrummed with ambition, and yet, inside Hannah's modest apartment, the world seemed to stand still. The unopened letter lay on the coffee table like a relic from another life. Her father's name, Thomas Williams, was scrawled on the envelope in his familiar, careful hand. Hannah stared at it, a swirl of emotions rising in her chest. 15 years had passed since she lost him, a kind, hard-working man whose life had been far too short. For Hannah, his memory was a mosaic of warmth and wisdom, but also of quiet pain. He rarely spoke of his struggles, choosing instead to shield her with stories of hope and resilience. Now, this letter threatened to unravel all the certainties she clung to. The sun dipped below the horizon as she finally worked up the courage to tear it open. The paper was fragile, the ink slightly faded, but the words were clear. Dear Hannah, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer with you. I hope by now you've found your own light, but there's something I never told you, something I couldn't tell you. There's a man, Elliot Grayson. He was a part of my life in ways I struggled to reconcile. If you want to understand my story, you'll need to find him. I hope you can forgive me for not sharing this sooner. Trust your heart. And remember, you are braver than you know. Love, Dad. Hannah's brow furrowed as she read the name again. Elliot Grayson. It was unfamiliar, foreign, yet it carried the weight of something deeply personal. Her father had always been a private man, but this letter opened a door she wasn't sure she wanted to step through. She set the letter down, her mind racing. Who was this man? What had he done to be so integral to her father's life? And why had Thomas chosen to keep him a secret? Hannah's thoughts were interrupted by a small photo that slipped from the envelope, landing face up on the floor. She picked it up, her breath hitching at the sight. Her father, much younger, stood beside a stoic man with cold, calculating eyes. They were in front of a modest storefront, Grayson's General Store, its name emblazoned on a wooden sign above the door. The photo felt like a challenge, daring her to uncover its story. For the rest of the evening, Hannah wrestled with her decision. A part of her wanted to toss the letter and the photo back into the box and forget it ever existed. But the other part, the part that had always sought to understand her father's silences, knew she couldn't. By morning, her mind was made up. With the photo tucked into her bag and the letter folded carefully in her journal, Hannah packed a small suitcase. Her destination, Windmill Creek, Pennsylvania. As she locked her apartment door, She couldn't shake the feeling that this journey was about more than just her father's past. It was about her own identity, the pieces of herself she had yet to discover. Brooklyn faded into the distance as Hannah drove north, the city skyline giving way to open highways and the promise of answers hidden in a small, forgotten town. She had no idea what she would find in Windmill Creek, but one thing was certain. She was about to uncover a story far greater than she ever imagined. Hannah's car hummed steadily down the highway, the New York skyline shrinking in her rearview mirror. The road ahead was a blur of asphalt and possibilities, but her mind was stuck in the past. The letter and photograph, safely tucked into the passenger seat beside her, felt like silent passengers, whispering secrets she wasn't ready to face. The open highway soon gave way to rolling hills and dense forests. The urban noise of Brooklyn faded, replaced by the rustling of leaves and the occasional chirp of birds. This was a world her father had known, a quieter, simpler world that felt both foreign and strangely familiar. Hannah adjusted the dial on the radio, hoping music might drown out her thoughts, but the static of an old country station only amplified her unease. She gave up, letting the silence envelop her. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, warm and steady, urging her forward even as doubt crept in. Thomas Williams had been a man of quiet strength, always ready with a smile or a story to lighten her day. Growing up, Hannah had seen him as unshakable, a man who worked hard, loved deeply, and carried the weight of the world without complaint. But there were cracks in his armor, moments when his laughter faltered, or his eyes grew distant. She remembered finding him once, sitting alone at the kitchen table late at night, staring at an old photograph. When she asked about it, he simply smiled, tucked the photo away and said, "Some memories are best left where they belong." Now, with that same photo in her possession, she felt the weight of his unspoken words. By mid-afternoon, the small town of Windmill Creek came into view. Nestled in the heart of Pennsylvania, it was the kind of place where time seemed to stand still. Red brick buildings lined the main street, their weathered signs bearing names like Patterson's Pharmacy and Millie's Diner. The air was thick with the scent of fresh bread and damp earth, a stark contrast to the metallic tang of city life. Hannah parked her car near the town square, stepping out to stretch her legs. The locals cast curious glances her way, their expressions a mix of friendliness and suspicion. She felt like an outsider, a city girl in a place where everyone probably knew everyone else's business. A small library caught her eye, its stone facade adorned with ivy. A welcome reprieve from the stairs, she thought. She pushed open the heavy oak door, stepping into a world of quiet whispers and the faint smell of aged paper. Behind the front desk sat a woman in her late 60s, her silver hair pulled into a neat bun. She looked up from her book and smiled warmly. "Good afternoon, dear. Can I help you find something?" Hannah hesitated before approaching. "Hi, I'm just passing through town and thought I'd take a look around. It's a lovely library." The woman's smile widened. "Well, we're not as grand as the libraries in the city, I imagine, but we do our best. I'm Lizzie Foster, the librarian here. And you are?" "Hannah. Hannah Williams." She paused, considering how much to reveal. "My father. He spent some time in this town years ago." Lizzie's expression shifted, a flicker of recognition in her eyes. "Williams, you say? Your father wouldn't happen to be Thomas Williams, would he?" Hannah's breath caught. "You knew him?" "Oh, my dear. Everyone in Windmill Creek knew Thomas. He was a good man, a kind man, always helping others, even when he had little to give. We could have used more like him around here." Hannah felt a lump form in her throat. "I'm trying to learn more about his time here. There's so much I never knew about his life." Lizzie leaned forward, her gaze intent. Then you've come to the right place. But I warn you, Hannah, this town, it has its shadows. Not everything you uncover will be easy to face. Lizzie offered to help Hannah with her search, leading her to a back room filled with old records and dusty archives. Together, they sifted through faded newspapers and yellowed documents. Hannah's heart raced as she pieced together fragments of her father's past. One article caught her eye. Local man accused of theft at Grayson's General Store. The date matched the timeline her father had mentioned in his stories. Her fingers trembled as she read further. The article described Thomas being accused by the store's owner, Elliot Grayson, of stealing merchandise, a claim that divided the town. Some stood by Thomas, while others sided with Grayson. Grayson's General Store, Hannah murmured, the name stirring a sense of unease. Lizzie nodded solemnly. It's still standing, though it's not what it used to be. Jack Grayson runs it now, Elliot's grandson. He's a good man, but the Grayson name? It carries a lot of history. Hannah's pulse quickened. Jack Grayson? Does he know about my father? Lizzie hesitated. Jack might know more than he lets on. If you're serious about learning the truth, you'll have to talk to him. But tread carefully, Hannah. This town has a way of clinging to its secrets. As dusk settled over Windmill Creek, Hannah found herself standing outside Grayson's General Store. The building was modest, its wooden facade worn by time. She took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The sound of a bell echoing through the quiet interior. Behind the counter stood a man in his mid-30s, his broad shoulders and sharp features eerily reminiscent of the photo she had found. Jack Grayson looked up, his piercing blue eyes locking onto hers. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone polite but guarded. Hannah swallowed hard, the weight of her father's letter heavy in her mind. I'm looking for answers. About Thomas Williams." Jack's expression hardened, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. He set down the ledger he'd been holding, his jaw tightening. "Thomas Williams? What's your connection to him?" "I'm his daughter," she replied, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. "I think you might know something about his time here." For a moment, silence hung between them, thick and suffocating. Then Jack nodded toward the back room. "We should talk." As Hannah followed Jack into the dimly lit room, her heart pounded with anticipation. She didn't know what she would uncover in Windmill Creek, but one thing was certain. This was only the beginning. The back room of Grayson's General Store was dimly lit, a faint glow emanating from a single bulb hanging overhead. Shelves lined the walls, filled with old ledgers, dusty trinkets, and faded photographs that seemed to tell a story no one wanted to remember. Jack motioned for Hannah to take a seat at the small table near the corner. He leaned against the edge of a wooden counter, crossing his arms. "So you're Thomas Williams' daughter. What brings you here, really?" Hannah hesitated, her fingers brushing the edge of her father's letter, tucked into her pocket. "My father left me a letter. He mentioned your grandfather, Elliot Grayson. I'm trying to understand what happened between them." Jack's eyes darkened, his jaw tightening. Elliot wasn't an easy man to know. Whatever happened between him and your father is long buried. "But it's not," Hannah countered, her voice steady but firm. "It's still alive in this town, in the way people talk about him, and about your family. If there's something I can learn, something that might bring clarity, I need to know." Jack studied her for a moment before sighing. "I'll show you something." Jack reached for an old ledger on one of the shelves, its leather cover cracked and worn. He flipped through the pages with practiced hands, stopping at a section where Thomas Williams's name was scrawled repeatedly under various dates. "These are purchase records," Jack explained. My grandfather kept meticulous notes about everyone who came into the store. But Thomas's name appears in more places than it should. It doesn't make sense. Hannah leaned in, examining the entries. Why would he write my father's name so many times? Jack shook his head. I don't know. But there's something else. He flipped to the back of the ledger, revealing a hastily written note tucked between the pages. The handwriting was shaky, almost frantic. It read, Forgiveness doesn't erase the past, but it's the only way to move forward. Hannah's heart skipped a beat. This was my father's handwriting. Jack nodded. I found it here years ago. I didn't know what to do with it. Hannah traced the faded ink with her fingertips, her mind racing. What had her father been trying to forgive? And why had Elliot kept this note? The creak of the back door interrupted their thoughts. Caroline Grayson, Jack's aunt, stepped into the room, her presence commanding and tense. Her piercing gaze darted between Jack and Hannah, her expression hardening. What's going on here? Caroline demanded, her voice sharp. We're trying to figure out what happened between Elliot and Thomas, Jack said evenly. Caroline's eyes narrowed. You're stirring up things best left alone. The past is the past for a reason. Hannah straightened, meeting Caroline's gaze. The past doesn't just disappear because we ignore it. My father deserved better than what he got in this town. Caroline's lips thinned. You have no idea what you're talking about. My father made mistakes, but he wasn't the only one. If you dig too deep, you won't like what you find. With that, she turned on her heel and left, the door slamming shut behind her. The tension in the room lingered, heavy and suffocating. That night, Hannah lay awake in her room, at the Windmill Creek bed and breakfast, the note and ledger haunting her thoughts. Caroline's words replayed in her mind. You won't like what you find. What secrets had her father been caught up in? And why did the Grayson family seem so intent on keeping them buried? A soft knock at the door startled her. She opened it to find Lizzie Foster standing there, a worried expression on her face. I heard about what happened at the store, Lizzie said, stepping inside. You're digging into dangerous territory, Hannah. I don't care, Hannah replied, her voice resolute. I need to know the truth. Lizzie hesitated before handing her an old newspaper clipping. The headline read, Local man accused of theft at Grayson's General Store. The article detailed how Thomas had been accused of stealing money from the store's register, a claim that had divided the town. They dragged his name through the mud, Lizzie said softly. But there were those of us who knew the truth. Thomas would never have done such a thing. Then why did Elliot accuse him? Hannah asked, her voice trembling. Lizzie shook her head. Fear makes people do terrible things, and Elliot was a man driven by fear. The next day, Hannah returned to the store, determined to continue her search. Jack was already waiting for her, holding an envelope he had found in a hidden compartment beneath the counter. I thought you might want to see this, Jack said, handing it to her. Inside was a black and white photograph of her father and Elliot, standing side by side outside the store. Thomas's expression was calm but determined, while Elliot's face was etched with tension. What were they to each other? Hannah murmured, more to herself than to Jack. Jack shook his head. I wish I knew. My grandfather never talked about it. Hannah turned the photo over, finding a handwritten note on the back. Forgiveness begins where blame ends. Hannah stared at the photo and the note, a chill running down her spine. The more she uncovered, the more questions arose. As she looked at Jack, she realized they were both caught in the shadows of their families' pasts. We need to keep digging, she said firmly. Jack hesitated but nodded. Then, Let's find out what really happened. As they left the store together, neither noticed the figure watching them from across the street, hidden in the shadows. The rain had subsided by the time Hannah returned to her room at the Windmill Creek Bed and Breakfast, leaving the streets slick and shining under the dim glow of streetlights. The photograph and Elliot Grayson's cryptic note weighed heavily on her mind. She sat at the small wooden desk in her room, staring at the objects laid out before her. The old ledger, the photo, and the note her father had left behind. Her father's words echoed in her head. Forgiveness begins where blame ends. But how could she forgive a man who had turned her father's life into a storm of hardship? And why did it seem like there was more to this story than anyone wanted to admit? The next morning, Hannah decided to visit the Windmill Creek Public Library. Lizzie Foster greeted her warmly, her hands dusted with chalk from working on the community bulletin board. "I thought you might come back," Lizzie said, offering a knowing smile. "I found something that might help you." Lizzie handed Hannah a folder containing clippings and records from decades past. Most were small-town articles about local events, but one headline stood out. "Grayson accuses local man of theft. Rift in Windmill Creek's community." Hannah scanned the article. The text detailed the accusation against her father, the ensuing trial, and the ripple effects throughout the town. It painted Thomas Williams as a divisive figure, respected by some for his integrity, and vilified by others for reasons that weren't fully explained. "Why would Elliot Grayson accuse my father of something so serious?" Hannah asked, her voice tinged with frustration. Lizzie frowned. It wasn't just about the money. It was about survival. This town was struggling back then. Factories closing, people losing their homes. Fear does strange things to people. And Elliot, he wasn't immune. That evening, as Hannah pored over the documents in her room, a knock at the door startled her. She opened it to find Jack Grayson standing there, rain dripping from his jacket. His expression was a mixture of concern and determination. "I couldn't stop thinking about what we found," Jack said, stepping inside. "I want to help. My family's history is as much my burden as it is yours now." Hannah nodded, grateful for his resolve. "I've been looking through the old records Lizzie gave me. There's a pattern, Jack. Something bigger than just a misunderstanding between your grandfather and my father." Jack raised an eyebrow. What do you mean?" Hannah spread out the clippings on the desk. "It's not just about the theft. Look at this." She pointed to a series of reports about Elliot Grayson's financial troubles, followed by sudden investments from an unnamed backer. "Someone was pulling the strings, and it wasn't your grandfather." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of shattering glass. Hannah and Jack rushed to the window, finding a brick on the floor surrounded by shards. A note was tied to the brick with rough twine. Jack picked it up and read aloud, "Leave the past alone, or you'll regret it." Hannah felt a chill run down her spine. This isn't just about my father and your grandfather anymore. Someone doesn't want us to dig deeper. Jack's jaw tightened. That only means we're getting close to something important. The next day, Jack suggested they search the storage area in the basement of the general store. The dimly lit space was cramped with old boxes and crates, the air thick with the scent of dust and mildew. After hours of sifting through forgotten records, Hannah unearthed a small leather-bound book hidden inside a hollowed-out box. "This doesn't look like one of your grandfather's ledgers," Hannah said, handing it to Jack. Jack opened it, his brow furrowing. The pages were filled with cryptic entries, but one word appeared repeatedly. "Benson." "Harold Benson," Jack said quietly, recognizing the name of the town's most influential figure during his grandfather's time. He owned half the businesses in Windmill Creek. If anyone had the power to manipulate my grandfather, it was him. The final entry in the ledger read, "Debt paid." But at what cost? Armed with the new discovery, Hannah and Jack confronted Caroline Grayson at her home. Caroline's usually composed demeanor cracked when she saw the ledger. "Where did you find this?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "In the store's basement," Jack replied. "Why didn't you tell me about Benson?" Caroline hesitated, her hands trembling as she reached for the ledger. "Because it doesn't matter anymore. Benson is gone, and dragging his name through the mud won't change what happened." "It matters to me," Hannah interjected. "My father's name was ruined because of whatever deal Benson made with Elliot." Caroline's eyes softened, and she let out a weary sigh. "You think I don't carry that guilt? My father was a good man, but he wasn't a strong one. Benson controlled this town, and he used my father as a pawn." "Then help us," Hannah pleaded. "Help us uncover the truth." Caroline hesitated before nodding. "There's one person who might have the answers you're looking for. Martha Hayes. She was close to both Thomas and Elliot, and she saw more than anyone else." That night, as Hannah and Jack planned their visit to Martha Hayes's nursing home, the tension between them simmered. Jack was visibly shaken by the revelations about his grandfather. "Are you okay?" Hannah asked softly. Jack shook his head. "I don't know. I've spent my whole life hearing stories about how my grandfather built this store from nothing, how he was a pillar of the community. Now I find out he was just another cog in Benson's machine." Hannah placed a hand on his arm. "Your grandfather was more than that. He made mistakes, yes, but he also tried to make things right in his own way. That's what we need to focus on." Jack nodded, his resolve strengthening. "Then, let's find Martha and get to the bottom of this." As Hannah prepared for the next step in their journey, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Standing by the window, she glanced outside and spotted a shadowy figure disappearing around the corner. The threats were becoming more real, but so was her determination. Whatever secrets Windmill Creek was hiding, she was going to uncover them, even if it meant putting herself in danger. The morning air in Windmill Creek carried a sharp chill, as though the town itself had grown colder with the mounting revelations. Hannah sat at the edge of her bed, the previous night's events replaying in her mind. The shattered window and the cryptic warning had left her shaken, but they also steeled her resolve. Someone didn't want the truth to surface, and that only made her more determined to uncover it. Jack arrived early, his expression grim but focused. "I couldn't sleep," he admitted, as they walked toward the general store. "I kept thinking about Benson and how much power he had over this town." Hannah nodded, her own thoughts swirling. "If Benson was behind the accusations against my father, there must be more evidence. We need to find it." Inside the store, the scent of old wood and dust filled the air as they descended into the basement. The leather-bound ledger they'd discovered the day before lay open on the workbench, its entries casting long shadows over Elliot Grayson's legacy. Jack flipped through the pages again, searching for anything they might have missed. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a series of entries marked with the initials HB. "These payments align with the timeline of Benson's rise to power. My grandfather must have been paying him off." Hannah frowned. "Paying him off? For what? To protect the store? To protect your family?" Jack's expression darkened. "Maybe both. Or maybe it was something worse." Their investigation was interrupted by the sound of footsteps upstairs. Caroline Grayson appeared in the doorway, her face pale and drawn. "You two need to stop this," she said, her voice edged with desperation. Digging into the past won't bring your father back, Hannah. And it won't absolve our family, Jack. Jack bristled at her words. So, we're just supposed to ignore it? Pretend it never happened? Caroline stepped closer, her eyes darting toward the ledger. You don't understand what you're dealing with. Benson may be gone, but his influence isn't. There are people in this town who benefited from his schemes, people who will do anything to keep their secrets buried. Hannah's gaze hardened. Are you saying you're one of them? Caroline's lips pressed into a thin line. I'm saying you should think carefully about what you're trying to accomplish. Some truths aren't worth the cost. Despite Caroline's warning, Hannah and Jack pressed on. Among the cluttered shelves in the basement, they discovered an old tin box tucked behind a row of rusted tools. Inside was a journal bound in cracked leather, the initials E.G. etched faintly into the cover. This must have been your grandfather's, Hannah said, carefully opening the journal. The pages were filled with Elliot Grayson's neat, slanted handwriting, chronicling his thoughts and struggles during the most turbulent years of his life. As they read, a complex portrait of Elliot began to emerge. He wrote about the pressure to keep the store afloat, the economic downturn that had crippled Windmill Creek, and the deals he'd made with Benson to protect his family. One entry stood out. Thomas Williams didn't deserve what happened to him. But I had no choice. Benson had me cornered, and the cost of defiance was too high. Jack's hands trembled as he read the words aloud. He knew my grandfather was innocent. He knew. And he let it happen. Caroline's earlier suggestion about Martha Hayes lingered in their minds. If anyone could provide clarity about the events that had shaped their families, it was her. They drove to the nursing home on the outskirts of town, the journey punctuated by tense silence. Martha Hayes was a frail but sharp-eyed woman in her late 80s. Her room was small but tidy, adorned with faded photographs and handwritten notes. She greeted them with a warm smile, her eyes glinting with recognition when she saw Hannah. You're Thomas's daughter, Martha said, her voice soft but steady. You have his eyes. Hannah smiled faintly. I've been told that before. Martha gestured for them to sit. I suppose you've come to ask about your father and Elliot. Yes, Hannah replied. I need to know why my father was accused and why Elliot went along with it. Martha's expression grew somber. It wasn't Elliot's idea. It was Benson's. That man controlled this town like a puppet master, and Elliot was one of his strings. But your father, he was a threat to Benson's power. He spoke out against the injustice in this town, and Benson couldn't tolerate that. As Martha recounted the events of the past, she reached for a small box on her nightstand. Inside was an unopened letter, the paper yellowed with age. This was written by your father, Martha said, handing the letter to Hannah. He gave it to me years ago, asking me to deliver it to Elliot, but I never had the chance. Hannah unfolded the letter carefully, her father's familiar handwriting bringing a lump to her throat. The words were both a plea and a challenge. Elliot, you have the power to make things right. I hope one day you find the courage to use it. Jack read the letter over her shoulder, his jaw tightening. He never did he? Martha shook her head. Number. But maybe you can. The visit to Martha Hayes left Hannah and Jack with more questions than answers. As they drove back to Windmill Creek, the shadow of Harold Benson loomed larger than ever. His manipulation of Elliot Grayson had set the stage for decades of pain and division, and his influence still lingered in the town's cracks. Do you think Benson's descendants are still involved in all this? Jack asked, his voice heavy with suspicion. Hannah glanced at him. If they are, we need to find out, and we need to stop them. That night, As Hannah prepared to leave the bed and breakfast for a walk, she found an envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a chilling message. Your father fought Benson and lost. Don't make the same mistake. Her hands trembled as she read the note, but her resolve only deepened. Whatever danger lay ahead, she knew she couldn't turn back now. The fight her father had started wasn't over, and this time, she wouldn't let it end in silence. The late afternoon sun painted Windmill Creek in hues of amber and gold. But for Hannah, the warmth of the light couldn't penetrate the storm brewing inside her. The cryptic letter slipped under her door weighed heavily on her mind. Its threatening tone, coupled with the revelations from Elliot's journal and Martha Hayes, only deepened the mystery surrounding her father's past. As she and Jack drove toward the outskirts of town to visit Martha again, Hannah couldn't shake the feeling that they were treading on dangerous ground. Yet the pull of the truth was stronger than her fear. We have to know, Jack, she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her chest. If Benson's influence reached as far as Martha suggests, then we're not just fighting for my father's memory. We're fighting for this town. Jack nodded, his jaw tight. I just hope we're ready for what we find. Martha greeted them at her nursing home door with the same warm smile that had softened Hannah's heart during their first visit. Her frail frame seemed even more delicate under the afternoon light, but her eyes held the clarity of someone who had carried secrets too long. Back so soon? She teased lightly, motioning for them to come in. I take it you found more questions than answers. Hannah smiled faintly. You could say that. We found Elliot's journal and there's a lot to unpack. Martha nodded knowingly. Elliot carried a heavy burden, but so did your father. They were two sides of the same coin in a way. Both good men, but trapped by a system that thrived on fear and control. Seated in her cozy living room, with a pot of chamomile tea steaming between them, Martha began to weave a tale that transported them back decades. Your father, Thomas, came to Windmill Creek with nothing but hope and determination, she said, her voice soft but steady. He saw the potential in this town, even when others didn't. He wasn't just a worker at the mill. He was a beacon for those who believed in fairness and justice. Martha's eyes grew misty as she continued. But Harold Benson couldn't tolerate someone like Thomas. Benson's power wasn't just in his wealth. It was in his ability to instill fear. He had dirt on everyone, and he wasn't afraid to use it. Hannah leaned forward, her heart pounding. What did Benson have on Elliot? Martha sighed, the weight of old memories pressing down on her. Elliot was a proud man, but he was also desperate. The general store was his life's work, and Benson knew it. He threatened to destroy Elliot's business, to ruin his family if he didn't cooperate. Cooperate how? Jack asked, his voice tight with emotion. Martha hesitated, then spoke the words that hung heavy in the air. By accusing Thomas of theft. It was a lie, of course, but it served Benson's purpose. It silenced your father and reminded the town what happens to those who challenge the status quo. Hannah reached into her bag and pulled out the second letter Martha had given her during their last visit. She unfolded it carefully, the faint scent of aged paper filling the room. Author of this letter, she said, her voice trembling, was my father's plea to Elliot to make things right. He believed in forgiveness, even after everything Elliot had done. Martha nodded. Thomas had a heart bigger than most. But forgiveness doesn't erase pain, Hannah. It doesn't undo what's been done. Hannah's eyes filled with tears as she read the letter aloud, her father's words resonating with the room's silence. I know. You did what you thought you had to, Elliot. But fear is no excuse for injustice. I forgive you. but I hope one day you can forgive yourself." The conversation turned to Benson's broader network. Martha revealed that Benson's reach extended far beyond Windmill Creek. He had ties to other towns, other families, all bound by the same toxic mix of power and fear. "Benson didn't act alone," she said. "He had allies, people who benefited from the system he created. Some of them are still out there, hiding in plain sight." Hannah's mind raced. The journal, the letters, and Martha's story all pointed to a web of corruption that was far more intricate than she had imagined. And at the center of it all was Benson, a man whose actions continued to cast a long shadow over the town. Before they left, Martha handed Hannah a faded photograph. It showed Thomas standing with a group of mill workers, their faces weary but determined. Beside him was a woman Hannah didn't recognize. "This is Rebecca Carter," Martha explained. "She was a journalist who tried to expose Benson years ago. She might be able to help you now." Hannah's pulse quickened. "Is she still alive?" Martha nodded. "She lives in Philadelphia. But be careful. Rebecca's work has made her enemies. She's paid a heavy price for seeking the truth." The drive back to Windmill Creek was quiet. Both Hannah and Jack lost in thought. The photograph burned a hole in Hannah's lap, a tangible link to the past, and a potential key to unlocking the truth. "Do you think this Rebecca Carter will help us?" Jack asked finally. "I don't know," Hannah admitted. "But if she's anything like my father, she won't be able to resist." As they pulled into the driveway of the bed and breakfast, Hannah noticed a small package sitting on the porch. Her name was scrawled across the top, in bold black letters. She exchanged a wary glance with Jack before picking it up. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a stack of old newspaper clippings. The headline on the topmost article sent a chill down her spine. "Harold Benson, the untouchable kingpin of Windmill Creek." Beneath it was a handwritten note. "The past is deeper than you think. Keep digging, and you'll find more than you bargained for." Hannah's hands trembled as she turned the note over, revealing one final line. "But be prepared to lose everything." Her resolve, however, only grew stronger. The truth was out there, and no threat, no matter how dire, would stop her from finding it. The early morning light filtered through the curtains of the bed and breakfast, painting the room in soft hues of orange and pink. Hannah sat on the edge of her bed, holding the letter addressed to Elliot Grayson. The weight of her father's words lingered in her chest, as if Thomas himself was urging her forward from beyond the grave. Across from her, Jack leaned against the doorframe, his face a mixture of curiosity and unease. "What does it say?" he asked softly. Hannah hesitated. "It's personal. My father wrote it to Elliot, hoping for reconciliation. He forgave him, Jack, even after everything." Jack's jaw tightened, the weight of his family's past pressing on him. "I don't know if I could have done that," he admitted. "But it doesn't surprise me. Your father sounds like the kind of man this town didn't deserve." Hannah smiled faintly, folding the letter back into its envelope. "And yet, he stayed. He believed this town could change." Jack straightened, determination flickering in his eyes. "Then let's make sure his belief wasn't in vain." The general store had always been a symbol of Windmill Creek's history, a blend of nostalgia and buried secrets. When Hannah and Jack stepped inside that morning, the air felt heavier, as though the walls themselves bore witness to the conversation about to unfold. Caroline Grayson stood behind the counter, organizing a shelf of old ledger books. Her sharp gaze landed on them as they entered, and her lips pressed into a thin line. "Back again?" she get her tone clipped. "What do you want now?" Hannah stepped forward, holding the letter out. I think you need to see this. Caroline's eyes narrowed, but she took the envelope, her hands trembling slightly as she opened it. The room fell silent as she read, her expression shifting from suspicion to something softer, something almost vulnerable. When she finished, she carefully folded the letter and placed it on the counter. My father was a complicated man, she said quietly. But he wasn't evil. Hannah bristled. Complicated doesn't excuse what he did to my father. Caroline's gaze snapped up, a flicker of defensiveness returning. You think I don't know that? I've spent my whole life trying to make sense of the choices he made. But you need to understand. He was a pawn, just like your father was. Caroline reached under the counter and pulled out a worn leather journal. This belonged to my father, she said, her voice steady but tinged with sadness. I wasn't going to share it, but after reading that letter, you deserve to know. She handed the journal to Hannah, who opened it carefully. The pages were filled with Elliot's cramped handwriting, detailing his struggles during the height of Harold Benson's reign. He threatened everything I held dear, one entry read. I didn't want to hurt Thomas, but Benson left me no choice. If I refused, my family would have been ruined. Jack read over her shoulder, his face darkening with each word. He admitted it, he said. He knew what he was doing was wrong, and he carried that guilt until the day he died, Caroline added. He tried to make amends in his own way, but it was never enough. Hannah closed the journal, her heart heavy. My father forgave him, but forgiveness doesn't erase the damage. No, Caroline agreed, but it's a start. As they were leaving the store, Jack paused, his gaze lingering on a shelf lined with old photographs. One caught his eye, a faded black and white image of Elliot Grayson standing beside Harold Benson. The two men looked tense, their body language stiff. Do you know where this was taken? Jack asked, pointing to the photo. Caroline hesitated. That's the old Benson estate. It's been abandoned for years, but I think Harold's granddaughter, Amelia, might still have some connection to it. Hannah's pulse quickened. Do you know how to contact her? Caroline shook her head. No, but if anyone does, it's Martha Hayes. She and Amelia were close once, before everything fell apart. That evening, Hannah and Jack returned to Martha's nursing home. The elderly woman greeted them warmly, her keen eyes immediately noticing the tension between them. What have you found? She asked, her voice gentle but probing. Hannah handed her the journal. Elliot's confession, she said, and a photograph of him with Harold Benson. We think Benson's granddaughter, Amelia, might have more answers. Martha's expression darkened. Amelia Benson. She was a good girl once, but she's been running from her family's shadow for years. Finding her won't be easy. Do you know where she might be? Jack asked. Martha nodded slowly. Last I heard, she was managing the old Benson vineyard. It's a couple of hours from here, in Laurel Ridge. The next morning, Hannah and Jack set out for Laurel Ridge. The drive was quiet, both of them lost in thought. When they arrived at the vineyard, the sprawling estate was both beautiful and foreboding, a stark contrast to the dark legacy it represented. Amelia Benson greeted them at the entrance, her demeanor wary but polite. She was in her late 30s, with sharp features and a guarded expression. I don't get many visitors, she said. What brings you here? Hannah hesitated, then decided on honesty. We're trying to uncover the truth about Harold Benson and his connection to my father, Thomas Williams. Amelia stiffened, her gaze narrowing. And why would I help you? Because the truth matters, Jack said firmly. And because your grandfather's actions hurt more people than you realize. Amelia studied them for a long moment before sighing. "Come with me." Amelia led them to an old storage room filled with boxes of documents and photographs. "I've been sorting through my grandfather's things for years," she explained, "trying to understand who he really was." She pulled out a file and handed it to Hannah. Inside were contracts, letters, and financial records, evidence of Harold Benson's manipulation and coercion. "This is everything I've found," Amelia said, "but exposing it won't be easy. My grandfather had allies, powerful ones. If you go after them, they won't go down without a fight." Hannah nodded, her resolve hardening. "We're ready." Amelia's lips curved into a faint smile. "Then, I wish you luck. You'll need it." As they left the vineyard, Hannah clutched the file tightly. The weight of its contents both daunting and exhilarating, but her determination outweighed her fear. Back in the car, Jack glanced at her. "What now?" Hannah's eyes burned with fierce resolve. "Now, we take this to someone who can help us bring it all to light." Neither of them noticed the black SUV, trailing them from a distance, its driver watching their every move. The road back to Windmill Creek stretched out in a seemingly endless ribbon of asphalt, flanked by fields turning golden under the late afternoon sun. Hannah stared out the window of Jack's truck, clutching the file of documents they had retrieved from Amelia Benson. The weight of the evidence was palpable, almost like a living, breathing entity in her lap. Each page in the file was a testament to a legacy of greed and manipulation that had scarred her father's life and the lives of countless others. Jack broke the silence. "Do you think Amelia was holding anything back?" Hannah shook her head. "Number, if anything." She seemed relieved to hand it over. "But she's right. What we're about to do is going to shake this town to its core." Jack tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "Good. It's about time." Back in Windmill Creek, the air seemed heavier, as if the town itself sensed the storm that was about to break. Hannah and Jack headed straight to Lizzie Foster's library, where Lizzie had been gathering a small group of trusted allies to support their mission. Inside the library's conference room, Lizzie greeted them warmly, but with a nervous energy. "Did you find anything?" Hannah placed the file on the table, the sound echoing in the small space. "More than we expected. This isn't just about my father or Elliot Grayson anymore. Harold Benson's reach extended far beyond this town." Lizzie frowned, flipping through the documents. "These records, they implicate some of the wealthiest families in the area. If this goes public, it's going to get ugly." "Good," Jack said firmly. "They've hidden behind their money and influence for too long." Lizzie nodded and pulled out her phone. "So we'll need more help if we're going to bring this to light. I've been in touch with Rebecca Carter, that investigative journalist you mentioned. She's on her way here." Hannah glanced at Jack. "Rebecca's going to be crucial. If anyone can make sure this story gets the attention it deserves, it's her." Jack leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "What about the town? Not everyone's going to be on board with this." Lizzie sighed. "That's an understatement. Windmill Creek has always been divided. Those who want change and those who cling to the past. You're about to find out just how deep those divisions go." The following day, Hannah and Jack presented their findings to a small private gathering of townspeople at the library. Among them were familiar faces: Caroline Grayson, Martha Hayes, and a few other community members who had shown support for their efforts. As Hannah laid out the evidence, a tense silence filled the room. Some people looked shocked, others angry. Caroline was the first to speak. "I always knew my father wasn't perfect," she said, her voice trembling. "But this, I had no idea he was being used by Harold Benson. It doesn't excuse what he did, but it changes how I see him. Not everyone was as understanding. A man in the back of the room, a local business owner, stood up angrily. You're digging up old wounds for what? To destroy what little this town has left? Hannah met his gaze steadily. We're doing this to heal, not destroy. But healing starts with the truth. In the days that followed, the town buzzed with conversations and arguments about the revelations. The divide between those who supported Hannah and Jack's efforts and those who resisted became increasingly apparent. Some townspeople left anonymous notes of support at the general store, while others vandalized it, scrawling "Traitors" across the newly painted sign that read, "Williams and Grayson's Light." Jack was undeterred. He spent hours repairing the damage, his resolve only growing stronger. Every time they do this, they're proving why we need to keep fighting, he told Hannah. When Rebecca Carter arrived in Windmill Creek, the atmosphere shifted. A seasoned journalist with a reputation for exposing corruption, she wasted no time diving into the files and conducting interviews with key players. Her first article about the case went live within days, drawing national attention. The headline read, "Legacy of Lies: How One Family's Greed Scarred a Small Town." The response was immediate. News crews descended on Windmill Creek, and social media exploded with debates about the story. While some praised Hannah and Jack for their courage, others accused them of dragging the town through the mud for personal gain. The increased attention brought new dangers. One evening, as Hannah and Jack were reviewing documents at the store, a loud crash shattered the quiet. They ran outside to find a rock had been thrown through the window, a note attached to it. The message was simple but chilling. "Leave it alone." Jack's jaw clenched as he picked up the note. "They're getting desperate." Hannah nodded, her heart pounding. "Which means we're getting close." Amelia Benson called Hannah late one night, her voice tense. "There's something else I didn't tell you," she said. "I found more documents after you left. Letters from my grandfather to several prominent businessmen in the region. They were all part of the same network. Can you send them to us?" Hannah asked. "I will," Amelia replied. "But be careful. These men aren't just going to let you expose them without a fight." Hannah, Jack, and their allies worked tirelessly to gather more evidence and build their case. Rebecca's articles continued to gain traction, turning the nation's eyes toward Windmill Creek. The pressure mounted as more townspeople came forward with their own stories of exploitation and corruption, emboldened by Hannah's determination. Lizzie organized community meetings to discuss ways to move forward, fostering a sense of unity among those willing to face the truth. The final push came during a town hall meeting, where Hannah and Jack presented their findings to the entire community. The room was packed, tension crackling in the air. Hannah stepped up to the microphone, her voice steady despite the pressure. "This isn't just about my father or Elliot Grayson. This is about all of us, about whether we're willing to face our past so we can build a better future." Jack stood beside her, adding, "My family's name has been tied to this town for generations. It's time we use that legacy to make things right." The crowd erupted in mixed reactions, some cheering, others shouting in anger. But amid the chaos, a sense of momentum began to build. The tide was turning. As the meeting adjourned, a figure lingered in the shadows outside the building, watching Hannah and Jack closely. A phone call was made, and a voice on the other end said, "They're not stopping. We need to escalate." Inside, unaware of the looming threat, Hannah and Jack shared a quiet moment of victory. "We've come this far," Hannah said. "There's no turning back now." Jack nodded, determination etched into his face. "Then let's see it through to the end." The crowd in the town hall murmured in hushed tones, a tension palpable in the air. Hannah stood near the front, clutching a file of documents that had the potential to unravel decades of deceit. Jack stood beside her, his presence steady, a silent pillar of support. This was the moment they had been working toward, a chance to confront Windmill Creek's past and push for a better future. The town hall was packed to capacity. Rows of folding chairs were filled with townspeople, journalists, and representatives from state authorities who had been drawn to the town by Rebecca Carter's investigative reporting. At the back of the room, cameras rolled, capturing every detail for a live broadcast. Hannah took a deep breath, stepping up to the podium. She scanned the faces before her, some familiar, some hostile, others cautiously supportive. "Thank you for being here," she began, her voice firm but laced with emotion. "Tonight isn't just about the past. It's about the future of Windmill Creek and what we choose to stand for as a community." Hannah methodically laid out the findings from the documents Amelia Benson had provided. She explained how Harold Benson had manipulated local businesses and individuals using threats and bribes to maintain control over the town's economy. The evidence painted a picture of a man who had wielded power ruthlessly, with little regard for the people he hurt. "Thomas Williams, my father, was one of his victims," Hannah said, her voice cracking slightly. "But he wasn't the only one. The effects of Harold Benson's actions rippled through this town, sowing division and pain." Jack stepped forward, holding up a journal belonging to Elliot Grayson. "My grandfather was complicit in this, and for that, I am deeply sorry. But he too was a pawn in Harold Benson's game. The truth we uncover tonight isn't meant to divide us further. It's meant to set us free." As Hannah and Jack presented their case, the room erupted into a flurry of reactions. Some townspeople cheered, applauding their bravery. Others shouted angrily, accusing them of tarnishing the town's reputation. An older man in the front row, a local farmer, stood up. "I've lived here my whole life," he said, "and I've seen what happens when people try to stand up to the powerful. But maybe it's time we stopped being afraid." His words were met with murmurs of agreement, but the dissenters weren't quieted. A woman near the back shouted, "You're tearing this town apart. What good does digging up old sins do?" Hannah met her gaze, unflinching. "Healing starts with truth. If we don't face what happened, we can't move forward." Midway through the meeting, Caroline Grayson stood. Her face was pale, her hands trembling, as she clutched a piece of paper. "I wasn't going to speak tonight," she began, her voice shaky. "But I can't stay silent anymore." She revealed that she had found letters in her father's belongings, letters from Harold Benson, threatening to ruin Elliot if he didn't comply. "My father wasn't a perfect man," Caroline admitted. "But he wasn't the monster some of you think he was. He was scared, just like so many others." Her words hung in the air, a poignant reminder of the complexity of the situation. Some in the crowd softened, their anger giving way to understanding. As the meeting drew to a close, a proposal was made to rename Grayson's General Store as Williams and Grayson's Light, symbolizing a new chapter for the town. The idea sparked heated debate, but ultimately a vote was taken. By a narrow margin, the proposal passed. The announcement was met with a mix of applause and murmurs of discontent. For Hannah and Jack, it was a small but meaningful victory, a step toward reconciliation and hope. As the townspeople filed out of the hall, Jack noticed a figure lingering in the shadows outside. He instinctively moved closer to Hannah, his protective instincts kicking in. "Did you see that?" he whispered. Hannah nodded, her eyes narrowing. "Someone doesn't want us to succeed." Later that night, they returned to the general store, to find another threatening note pinned to the door. "You've gone too far. Stop, or there will be consequences." Despite the warning, Hannah and Jack refused to back down. They spent the following days rallying support, working with Rebecca Carter and other allies to build a coalition for change. Lizzie organized a community meeting to discuss the next steps, inviting residents to share their ideas for addressing the town's challenges. Caroline, once hesitant, began volunteering at the newly renamed store, determined to make amends for her family's legacy. Her presence surprised many, earning her a mix of admiration and skepticism. For Hannah, the fight was personal, but it was also about something bigger. "This isn't just about my father," she told Jack one evening, as they sorted through papers in the back of the store. "It's about creating a future where no one else has to endure what he did." Jack nodded, his respect for her growing with each passing day. "And we're going to make that happen. Together." As the chapter closed, a phone call came late in the evening. Hannah answered, her heart racing when she recognized the voice on the other end. "You think this is over?" the caller said, their tone cold and menacing. "It's only just beginning." The line went dead, leaving Hannah and Jack staring at each other, the weight of the fight ahead settling over them like a heavy cloud. Jack broke the silence. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." Hannah nodded, determination blazing in her eyes. Together. The freshly painted sign above the store read, "Williams and Grayson's Light." For the first time in decades, the old general store stood as a symbol of hope, rather than division. The bright letters gleamed under the afternoon sun, a stark contrast to the shadows of its past. But the work had just begun. Healing a fractured town required more than a new name. The town of Windmill Creek buzzed with change, though not everyone welcomed it. The revelations at the town hall had sent shockwaves through the community. Some residents threw their support behind Hannah and Jack, eager to address the lingering inequalities. Others resisted, clinging to their version of the past. Hannah, Jack, and Lizzie Foster spearheaded efforts to create programs aimed at mending the town's divides. Together, they established the Windmill Initiative, a grassroots organization focused on addressing racial and economic disparities. Their first project was a mentorship program for underprivileged youth, inspired by Thomas Williams's legacy of resilience and generosity. Caroline Grayson became an unexpected ally. After years of defending her father's actions, she now found herself volunteering at the store, organizing community events, and advocating for the very reforms she once opposed. Though some residents remained skeptical of her transformation, her dedication was evident. One morning, Caroline joined Hannah at the store, sorting donations for a new community pantry. "You know," she said, her voice soft, "my father always told me that survival meant protecting what was ours, no matter the cost. I see now how wrong he was." Hannah looked up from a box of canned goods, her expression thoughtful. "It's hard to unlearn what we're taught. But you're here, and that means something." Caroline smiled faintly. "I hope so." Not everyone in Windmill Creek was ready for change. The store, now a hub for community gatherings, became a target for those who opposed the reforms. One night, Jack discovered graffiti scrawled across the front wall. "Traitors to tradition." Jack clenched his fists as he scrubbed the paint off, frustration etched into his face. "They're afraid," Hannah said, standing beside him with a bucket of soapy water. "Change is hard, especially when it forces people to confront their own complicity." "It's more than fear," Jack replied. "It's hatred, pure and simple." Their resolve only strengthened. Jack organized a group of volunteers to install security cameras around the store, while Hannah doubled down on outreach efforts determined to win over even the most reluctant townspeople. Amid the chaos, Hannah struggled with her own emotions. The weight of her father's legacy, the threats, and the resistance from the community began to take a toll. Late one night, she sat alone in the store, staring at a framed photo of Thomas. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for this," she whispered, her voice breaking. Jack found her there, sitting on the floor with her head in her hands. He sat beside her, his presence a quiet comfort. "Your father believed in you," he said gently. "And so do I." Hannah wiped her eyes, a small smile breaking through her tears. "Thank you." Lizzie suggested holding a town-wide potluck to bring people together, a chance for residents to connect on common ground. The idea was met with skepticism, but Hannah and Jack threw themselves into planning it. On the day of the event, the town square was transformed with tables laden with food, decorations strung between lampposts, and a stage for local musicians. Families mingled, some for the first time in years, and conversations flowed over plates of barbecue and potato salad. Caroline stood at the microphone, addressing the crowd. "This town has been through so much," she said, her voice steady. "But today, we're here to start something new, to honor the best of our past, while building a future we can all be proud of." Her words were met with applause, and for the first time, Hannah felt a glimmer of hope that unity was possible. Just as progress seemed within reach, a new threat emerged. One evening, Hannah found another note slipped under the door of the store. This one was more ominous than the last. "You've been warned. Stop or pay the price." Jack insisted on calling the authorities, but the police could only do so much. The warnings were clearly meant to intimidate them into giving up their efforts. "We can't let them win," Hannah said firmly. "This is bigger than us. It's about the future of this town." Jack nodded, determination etched into his face. "Then we keep going." Despite the challenges, the Windmill Initiative began to show results. The mentorship program paired local teens with volunteers, giving them opportunities to learn skills, build confidence, and envision brighter futures. Hannah and Jack also worked with local businesses to create job training programs for adults, addressing the economic disparities that had plagued the town for decades. Slowly but surely, attitudes began to shift. One afternoon, a young boy named Marcus approached Hannah at the store. "Miss Hannah," he said shyly, holding up a drawing of a windmill. "I made this for you." Hannah knelt down to examine the picture, her heart swelling with emotion. "It's beautiful, Marcus. Thank you." As the chapter drew to a close, Hannah and Jack reflected on how far they had come. Standing outside the store one evening, they watched as families gathered for a community meeting inside. "It's not perfect," Jack said, his arm around Hannah's shoulders, "but it's a start." Hannah nodded, her eyes fixed on the glowing sign above the store. "We're building something real, something my father would be proud of." Just as they turned to head inside, Jack's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at the screen, his expression darkening. "What is it?" Hannah asked, concern flashing across her face. Jack handed her the phone. The message was short, but chilling. "You can't save everyone. Stop, or you'll lose everything." Hannah's jaw tightened, her resolve unshaken. "Let them try," she said. "We're not stopping." The sense of accomplishment that had settled over Windmill Creek after the community potluck was fleeting. The threats had returned, darker and more personal. Hannah and Jack stood at the heart of a storm, brewing beneath the surface of the town's newfound unity. Despite the strides made with the Windmill Initiative, the shadows of the past refused to stay buried. The warning texts became more frequent and specific. One morning, Hannah awoke to find her car's tires slashed. A note pinned under the windshield wiper read, "The past should stay buried. Walk away." "This isn't random anymore," Jack said as he examined the note. "Someone's scared of what we're uncovering." Hannah refused to be intimidated. "If anything, this proves we're on the right track." But the escalating tension took its toll. At every meeting and event, Hannah found herself glancing over her shoulder, her confidence wavering. Lizzie Foster, always a voice of reason, encouraged her to stay vigilant. "Courage doesn't mean you're not afraid," she told Hannah. "It means you keep going despite it." While reorganizing the back room of the general store, Jack stumbled upon an old, rusted key hidden in a small compartment under a loose floorboard. Intrigued, he showed it to Hannah. Together, they searched the store until they found a concealed trapdoor beneath a stack of forgotten supplies. The hidden vault was a time capsule of Elliot Grayson's dealings. Old ledgers, letters, and documents detailed a web of transactions and alliances that implicated not only Harold Benson, but also several prominent figures in neighboring towns. Among the papers was a photograph of Thomas Williams with a cryptic note on the back. "A good man in a bad world." Hannah felt a chill as she stared at the note. "This is bigger than we thought," she said. "It wasn't just Windmill Creek. This corruption spread far beyond." Hannah and Jack enlisted the help of Rebecca Carter, a journalist known for exposing systemic corruption. Rebecca's sharp mind and relentless determination made her a valuable ally. She pored over the documents, connecting dots that painted a grim picture of Harold Benson's network. The evidence suggested that Benson had used coercion and blackmail to maintain control over the region's economy, leveraging people's fears to silence dissent. One ledger entry stood out, a series of payments marked with the initials TW. Hannah's heart sank. "My father's name is here," she whispered. Rebecca leaned closer, her expression serious. "This doesn't mean he was involved. It could mean he was targeted. Or maybe he was trying to fight back." The discovery added a new layer of complexity to their mission. Hannah was determined to clear her father's name and expose the full extent of the Benson family's corruption. As the investigation progressed, the resistance grew more aggressive. One evening, Jack's truck skidded off the road after someone tampered with its brakes. Though he escaped with minor injuries, the incident left them both shaken. "We're not just dealing with resentment," Jack said, his voice tight. "This is organized. Whoever's behind this isn't going to stop." Hannah's resolve hardened. "Neither are we." The revelations of Harold Benson's crimes further divided Windmill Creek. Some residents embraced the truth, eager to break free from the shadows of the past. Others viewed the efforts as an attack on the town's identity, blaming Hannah and Jack for stirring up trouble. At a town meeting, tensions boiled over. A group of residents stormed out, shouting accusations of betrayal. Caroline Grayson stood to address the crowd, her voice steady despite the hostility. "I understand your fear," she said, "but denying the truth won't make it go away. If we want this town to have a future, we have to face its past." Her words resonated with some, but the division remained palpable. The strain of the investigation began to affect Hannah and Jack's relationship. Long days and sleepless nights left them irritable and distant. One evening, after an argument about how to proceed with the evidence, Jack stormed out of the store. Hannah sat alone, staring at the photograph of her father. "Am I doing the right thing?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Lizzie found her there and sat beside her. "The right thing isn't always the easiest," she said. "But you're not alone in this. Remember that." Rebecca's investigation uncovered a name linked to Harold Benson's operations. a man named Victor Kane, a powerful figure who had quietly controlled much of the region's wealth and influence for decades. Rebecca traced his activities to a series of shell companies and offshore accounts, all tied back to Benson. "This is the smoking gun," Rebecca said, holding up a printout of the financial records. "With this, we can prove how deep this corruption goes." Hannah felt a surge of hope, but also a pang of fear. Exposing someone as powerful as Victor Kane would undoubtedly escalate the danger. Determined to leave no stone unturned, Jack and Hannah returned to the vault in the general store. Among the papers, they found a letter written by Elliot Grayson in his final years. The letter was addressed to Thomas Williams, but had never been sent. In it, Elliot expressed regret for his actions and revealed that he had kept a journal documenting the pressure Harold Benson had exerted on him. "I wanted to tell the truth," the letter read, "but I was too afraid. If you're reading this, I hope you can forgive me." The letter brought tears to Hannah's eyes. "He was trying to make amends," she said softly, "even if he couldn't do it in life." With the evidence mounting, Hannah, Jack, and Rebecca prepared to take their findings to the authorities. But the danger loomed larger than ever. Late one night, Hannah received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was calm but menacing. "You've done enough damage," the voice said. "If you know what's good for you, you'll stop now." Hannah's hands trembled as she hung up the phone. But instead of fear, she felt a surge of determination. "We can't stop," she told Jack. "Not now." The chapter ended with a chilling discovery. As Jack locked up the store for the night, he found another note pinned to the door. This one was different, a photograph of Hannah and Jack, taken from a distance with the words, "We're watching." Jack's jaw tightened as he handed the photo to Hannah. "They're trying to scare us," he said, "but they don't know who they're dealing with." Hannah stared at the photo, her resolve unwavering. "Let's make sure they find out." The storm clouds over Windmill Creek had grown darker. For Hannah, Jack, and Rebecca, the revelations about Victor Kane were only the beginning. As they dug deeper into the legacy of corruption, the risks mounted. The lines between past and present blurred, and their adversaries proved more cunning and ruthless than they had imagined. Hannah sat across from Rebecca Carter in the local diner, the once bustling spot now eerily quiet. The journalist's laptop screen displayed a web of connections, Victor Kane's name circled in bold, with countless lines connecting him to shell companies, prominent families, and political figures. "This is bigger than Benson ever was," Rebecca said, her voice low. "Kane didn't just run the region. He had influence across the state. If we expose him, it's going to shake a lot of powerful people." Jack leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "And put targets on all our backs." Hannah glanced out the window, her reflection staring back at her. "If we don't do this, everything my father stood for will be forgotten. We have to keep going." Rebecca's first article, detailing the extent of Victor Kane's manipulation, hit the front page of a major newspaper. The response was immediate and volatile. Protesters gathered in Windmill Creek, some demanding justice, others decrying the witch hunt that was tarnishing the town's name. Amid the chaos, Kane's lawyers sent cease and desist letters to Rebecca and her publication. A smear campaign began against Hannah and Jack, painting them as opportunists, exploiting old wounds for personal gain. "It's psychological warfare," Rebecca said, her fingers flying across her keyboard as she typed her next piece. "They want us to feel isolated and vulnerable." "They don't know us very well," Jack replied, a hint of defiance in his tone. Determined to find more concrete evidence, Hannah and Jack sought out Caroline Grayson. The older woman had grown increasingly remorseful as the investigation uncovered more about her father's role in the town's dark past. She agreed to meet them in the storeroom of the general store. "I've kept this hidden for years," Caroline said, pulling a dusty box from the back of a shelf. Inside were letters, contracts, and photographs, documents that painted a damning picture of Harold Benson's ties to Victor Kane. "Why didn't you come forward before?" Hannah asked. "I was scared," Caroline admitted, her voice trembling. "But you've shown me that fear isn't an excuse. It's time to make things right." The backlash intensified. Anonymous letters arrived daily, each one more menacing than the last. One evening, Jack's home was broken into. Though nothing was stolen, the message was clear: "We're always watching." Despite the mounting danger, the trio pressed on. Rebecca's articles gained traction, drawing attention from state and federal authorities. Public sentiment began to shift, with many calling for an investigation into Kane's empire. Hannah found herself at the center of it all, juggling media inquiries, community outreach, and the growing strain on her personal life. Yet, through it all, she refused to waver. Rebecca's relentless digging uncovered a shocking link. Victor Kane's rise to power had been facilitated by several prominent politicians, including a now-retired senator. The senator had been a close associate of Harold Benson, and their partnership had laid the groundwork for decades of corruption. The discovery sent shockwaves through the team. "This isn't just a local scandal," Rebecca said. "This could bring down some of the most powerful people in the state." Jack leaned over the table, his brow furrowed. "Do we have enough to go public?" "Not yet," Rebecca replied. "We need something irrefutable, something that ties Kane directly to the crimes." Late one night, as Hannah walked home from the store, she noticed a car idling at the end of her street. She quickened her pace, her heart pounding. Moments later, the car sped toward her, swerving at the last second. A voice shouted from the open window, "Stay out of it!" Hannah stumbled into her house, her hands shaking. When she recounted the incident to Jack and Rebecca, their resolve only strengthened. "If they're this desperate, it means we're close to something big," Jack said. A breakthrough came in the form of an anonymous tip, a former associate of Victor Kane, who claimed to have evidence of his crimes. The informant, a nervous man named Peter Long, agreed to meet them at a remote location. Long handed over a briefcase filled with documents, bank statements, wire transfers, and correspondence between Kane and Benson. Among the papers was a ledger detailing payments made to silence whistleblowers, including Thomas Williams. "My father," Hannah whispered, her voice heavy with emotion. Long nodded. "Your dad tried to stand up to them. He was one of the bravest men I ever met. They couldn't buy him, so they tried to destroy him." With the evidence in hand, the team prepared to release their findings. But Kane's reach was vast, and the threats escalated. Hannah's phone buzzed with a text. "If you publish, you'll regret it." Rebecca's editors hesitated, fearing legal and physical retaliation. "We need to act fast," Rebecca said. "If we sit on this, Kane will find a way to bury it." Hannah looked around the room at her allies. "We've come this far. There's no turning back now." The chapter closed with a tense scene. Hannah, Jack, and Rebecca gathered at the general store, reviewing the final draft of the article. The air was thick with anticipation and fear. As Rebecca hit send, a power outage plunged the store into darkness. Outside, the faint sound of footsteps echoed in the night. Hannah whispered, "They're coming." Jack stepped toward the door, his voice steady. "Let them." The fight for justice was taking its toll. Windmill Creek, once a quiet and unassuming town, had become the epicenter of a growing scandal that threatened to unravel decades of corruption. For Hannah, Jack, and Rebecca, the stakes had never been higher. Every step forward seemed to provoke a more intense backlash, testing their resolve and their faith in one another. Windmill Creek was in turmoil. The revelations about Victor Kane and Harold Benson had split the community into factions. Some residents, galvanized by the courage of Hannah and Jack, demanded accountability and change. Others, fiercely protective of the town's legacy, accused the group of tearing apart the fabric of their community. At a town meeting, emotions ran high. Hannah stood at the podium, clutching a copy of Rebecca's latest article. "This isn't about tearing down our town," she said, her voice steady despite the jeers from the crowd. "It's about building a future where we can all thrive without fear or injustice." A man in the back shouted, "You're just stirring up trouble. We've lived fine without digging up the past." Jack stepped forward, his voice firm. "Ignoring the past doesn't erase it. We owe it to ourselves and to those who came before us to face the truth." The public scrutiny was relentless. Jack, once a respected figure in the community, found himself the target of whispers and outright hostility. His business suffered, and graffiti defaced the general store. The words, "Traitor to your own," were scrawled across the newly repainted sign, "Williams and Grayson's Light." At home, Jack's frustration boiled over. "I thought people would want the truth," he said, pacing the kitchen. "I didn't expect this kind of hate." Hannah placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "Change is hard, Jack. But what we're doing matters. We can't let fear stop us." Rebecca, ever the pragmatist, chimed in. "Fear is their weapon. The more they lash out, the more we know we're getting to them." One evening, Hannah was approached by Mr. Albert Stanton, a retired lawyer who had been close to her father. They met at a quiet park bench, away from prying eyes. "Your father was a brave man," Stanton began, his voice tinged with regret. "But bravery comes at a cost." Hannah leaned forward. "You knew what he was fighting against, didn't you?" Stanton nodded. "Thomas believed in doing what was right, no matter the consequences. But he also understood the power of the people he was up against. They destroyed his reputation, Hannah, and they won't hesitate to do the same to you." Hannah's determination didn't waver. "They didn't win, Mr. Stanton. My father's story is finally being told." Rebecca's next article was a bombshell. It named not only Victor Kane, but also several high-profile figures who had benefited from his network of corruption. The piece detailed their influence over local governments, businesses, and law enforcement. The response was immediate. Social media exploded with calls for investigations. Protesters flooded the streets of Windmill Creek, demanding justice. Meanwhile, lawsuits and legal threats poured into Rebecca's newsroom. "Looks like we hit a nerve," she quipped, though the exhaustion in her eyes betrayed the toll it was taking. Hannah admired Rebecca's resilience. "You're fearless," she said. Rebecca smirked. "Not fearless, just stubborn." As the pressure mounted, Jack began to question his role in the fight. One evening, he found himself standing in the empty general store, staring at the faded photo of his grandfather and Thomas Williams. Caroline entered, her face soft with concern. "You're doing the right thing, Jack." "Am I?" he asked, his voice heavy. "Every day it feels like I'm losing more of this town. The people, the memories, everything that made it home." Caroline placed a hand on his shoulder. "Change is never easy. But you're not just fighting for yourself. You're fighting for everyone who deserves better." Despite the resistance, there were glimmers of hope. Lizzie Foster organized a community forum, inviting residents to share their thoughts and fears. The event was tense, but ultimately productive, with many expressing a desire for healing and progress. One moment stood out. A young boy, no older than 10, approached the microphone. "My mom says we have to be brave, like Miss Hannah and Mr. Jack," he said, his voice trembling but earnest. "I think they're trying to make our town better." The room fell silent, the boy's words cutting through the tension. For Hannah and Jack, it was a reminder of why they had started this fight in the first place. One night, as Hannah prepared for bed, her phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. She hesitated before answering. The voice on the other end was strained. "Hannah, you don't know me, but I need to talk to you. I have information about Kane, Benson, all of it." "Who is this?" Hannah asked, her heart racing. The caller hesitated. "Just meet me at the old train station tomorrow night. Come alone." Against Jack and Rebecca's advice, Hannah decided to meet the mysterious caller. She arrived at the abandoned train station, the air thick with anticipation. A man stepped out of the shadows, his face partially obscured by a hood. "You're braver than I expected," he said. "Who are you?" Hannah demanded. The man handed her a folder. "I used to work for Kane. This will prove everything." Before Hannah could ask more, the sound of approaching footsteps startled them both. The man shoved the folder into her hands. "Go," he whispered urgently before disappearing into the night. Back at the general store, Hannah, Jack, and Rebecca pored over the contents of the folder. Inside were contracts, photographs, and handwritten notes, tying Kane to a sprawling network of criminal activities. "This changes everything," Rebecca said, her voice filled with awe. But Hannah couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The last page of the folder was a handwritten note. "The truth comes at a price. Be ready to pay it." Jack looked up from the papers. "So, what's our next move?" Hannah's eyes were steely with determination. "We finish what we started." The morning of the community event dawned bright and crisp, yet the air was thick with anticipation. Windmill Creek had never seen a gathering like this. What was meant to honor Thomas Williams had evolved into a platform for change. The town square buzzed with nervous energy as residents milled about, unsure of what to expect. For Hannah, Jack, and Rebecca, this was the culmination of everything they had fought for. The day before the event, the trio worked tirelessly to prepare. Posters adorned the square, with photos of Thomas Williams, Elliot Grayson, and others who had been central to the town's history. A makeshift stage was set up in front of the courthouse, its steps decorated with flowers and candles. Lizzie Foster, ever the optimist, led a group of volunteers in arranging seating and distributing flyers. "People need to see this," she said, handing Hannah a stack of programs. "It's about more than just the past. It's about where we go from here." Caroline Grayson arrived quietly, a box of old family photographs in her hands. "These might help," she said, her voice tentative. "It's time the truth comes out, no matter how painful." Jack accepted the box, his gaze softening. "Thank you, Aunt Caroline. It means a lot." By mid-morning, the square was packed. The crowd was a mix of supporters, skeptics, and those simply curious about the commotion. Rebecca stood near the stage, her camera ready to capture every moment. Hannah took a deep breath as she approached the podium. Jack gave her a reassuring nod. "You've got this," he said. As Hannah began to speak, the crowd fell silent. "We are here today, not just to honor my father, Thomas Williams, but to confront the truths that have shaped this town. For too long, Windmill Creek has been burdened by the weight of secrets and injustices. It's time to face them together." Her voice was steady but impassioned, carrying the weight of her father's legacy and her own determination. She recounted Thomas's story, his struggles and triumphs, and the injustices he faced at the hands of Victor Kane and Harold Benson. Rebecca took the stage next, holding a stack of papers. What we have uncovered goes beyond this town. It's a web of corruption that spans generations and affects countless lives. These documents prove that Victor Kane and Harold Benson used their power to exploit and control not just Windmill Creek, but communities across the state. The crowd murmured, some in disbelief, others in anger. Rebecca continued, "This is our chance to hold them accountable. But it's up to all of us to demand change." Jack stepped forward, his presence commanding. "I stand before you as a Grayson, a name that carries both pride and shame. My grandfather, Elliot Grayson, made mistakes that hurt this community, but he also had the courage to try to make things right in the end. I want to honor that courage by continuing his fight for justice." His words resonated with the crowd, many of whom knew the Grayson family well. For the first time, Jack felt a sense of unity rather than division. Just as the event seemed to reach its peak, a commotion erupted near the back of the square. A man pushed through the crowd, shouting, "You're ruining this town. Leave well enough alone." He lunged toward the stage, but Jack intercepted him, holding him back. Others in the crowd joined in, forming a protective barrier around Hannah and Rebecca. As the man was escorted away, Caroline stepped forward. "That man represents the fear and resistance we all feel," she said, her voice firm. "But fear won't build a better future. Courage will." Hannah returned to the podium, her voice stronger than ever. "This is not about blame. It's about accountability. It's about ensuring that the mistakes of the past do not define our future." The crowd erupted in applause, a wave of hope and determination washing over them. By the end of the event, the town had reached a consensus. A committee was formed to oversee the rebuilding of Windmill Creek, focusing on transparency, equity, and community engagement. Hannah and Jack were elected as co-leaders, their shared vision for the town bringing people together. Caroline publicly donated the remaining Grayson family wealth to fund scholarships and community programs, a gesture that earned her a standing ovation. As the crowd dispersed, Hannah stood alone on the stage, looking out at the square. Jack joined her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We did it," he said, his voice filled with quiet pride. Hannah nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "We're not done yet. But this is a start." That evening, as Hannah reviewed the documents Rebecca had uncovered, her phone buzzed with another anonymous message. This time, it was a single sentence. "The fight is far from over." Hannah looked up at Jack, who was reading beside her. "Looks like we've got more work to do." Jack smiled. "Good. I'm not ready to stop fighting just yet." The morning light poured through the windows of Williams and Grayson's Light, illuminating the store's transformation. Once a relic of a divisive past, it now symbolized hope and unity. The shelves were stocked not just with goods, but with the stories and aspirations of a community finally ready to heal. Hannah and Jack stood at the podium in the store, addressing a crowd gathered to celebrate the launch of the Thomas Williams Scholarship Fund. The fund was designed to support underprivileged students, offering them opportunities Thomas himself could only dream of. Hannah spoke with heartfelt emotion. "This fund is not just about education. It's about giving back to a community that deserves a brighter future. My father believed in the power of forgiveness and second chances. Today, we honor that belief by creating opportunities for the next generation." Applause rippled through the crowd as Lizzie Foster stepped forward to announce the first scholarship recipients. Among them was Emily Carter, a shy but determined young woman who had spent hours volunteering at the store to earn her place. I promise to carry Mr. Williams's legacy forward, Emily said, clutching her certificate. Her words brought tears to Hannah's eyes, a reminder of why they had fought so hard. Caroline Grayson stood at the back of the crowd, watching the proceedings with a mix of pride and humility. Over the weeks since the town hall, she had thrown herself into volunteering, using her influence to rally support for the community programs. When it was her turn to speak, Caroline's voice trembled with sincerity. I have spent much of my life protecting a legacy I thought was honorable, but I was wrong. Today, I want to honor my family by helping to build a new legacy, one rooted in truth and justice. To everyone's surprise, she announced her decision to donate her family's remaining wealth to the scholarship fund. It's the least I can do to make amends. Her gesture was met with thunderous applause, a turning point for a woman once seen as a symbol of the old Windmill Creek. The store became a hub for community gatherings, a space where residents could share ideas and collaborate on rebuilding their town. Lizzie organized weekly meetings where people brainstormed ways to address lingering disparities. One evening, Jack unveiled a mural he had commissioned for the store's interior. Painted by a local artist, it depicted Thomas Williams standing hand in hand with Elliot Grayson, their faces illuminated by a warm, hopeful light. It's beautiful, Hannah whispered, her voice thick with emotion. It's exactly what this place needed. Despite the progress, resistance lingered. A group of disgruntled townspeople vandalized the store's new sign one night, spray painting hateful messages across the facade. The incident was a stark reminder of the work still left to do. Hannah and Jack refused to be deterred. This is exactly why we're doing this, Hannah said, as they repainted the sign the next morning, their determination unwavering. As the weeks passed, Hannah found herself drawn to her father's letters once more. Sitting in the quiet of her small office, she reread his words, finding new layers of meaning each time. You always believed in people, Dad, she murmured, even when they didn't deserve it. I hope we're making you proud. Jack entered the room, carrying a framed copy of Thomas's most poignant letter, the one that had sparked this journey. I thought this belonged here, he said, placing it on the wall. Hannah smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. It does. Thank you. The culmination of their efforts came in the form of a town-wide celebration, held in the newly renovated town square. Music filled the air. Children played games, and residents shared meals at long communal tables. Hannah took the stage one last time, her voice steady and filled with hope. This journey has taught me that change is never easy, but it's always worth it. Windmill Creek has shown that even in the face of our darkest truths, we can choose to build a brighter future. Jack joined her, taking the microphone. This isn't just about what we've done. It's about what we'll continue to do, together. The crowd erupted in applause, their cheers echoing through the square. It was a moment of unity, a testament to the power of resilience and community. As the celebration wound down, Hannah and Jack stood outside the store, watching the stars light up the night sky. Jack took her hand, a quiet promise of partnership and love. We've come so far, Hannah said softly, but there's still so much to do. Jack nodded, his gaze steady. And we'll do it. Together. In the distance, the faint sound of children's laughter mingled with the hum of the town, a symphony of hope and possibility. With the foundation laid and the community united, the stage was set for Windmill Creek to become a beacon of reconciliation and progress, a legacy that would endure for generations. The morning sun painted Windmill Creek in soft golden hues, a town transformed by the hard-fought efforts of its people. Where once stood silence and division, now echoed laughter, conversation, and the sound of hope reborn. Hannah Williams stood in the heart of the newly revitalized town square, now bustling with activity. The old Grayson's General Store had become more than a shop. It was a community center, a symbol of reconciliation. Renamed Williams and Grayson's Light, it shone as a beacon of unity and collaboration. Hannah looked around, her heart swelling with pride. The scholarship fund had grown exponentially, thanks to donations from across the country. Several students had already graduated, their futures bright with promise. Among them was Emily Carter, now a confident young woman on the cusp of attending law school. "Miss Williams," Emily called, running over with a smile. "I couldn't have done this without you." Hannah placed a hand on Emily's shoulder, her voice warm. "You've done this with your hard work, Emily. My father would be so proud." The changes in Windmill Creek had inspired a ripple effect. Jack and Hannah, now married, had expanded their initiatives beyond the town. Together, they founded the Legacy Foundation, a national nonprofit dedicated to small-town reform and addressing racial and economic disparities. Jack had taken the lead on launching vocational programs, providing trade skills to underserved communities. Meanwhile, Hannah worked closely with policymakers, advocating for systemic changes inspired by their journey in Windmill Creek. One of their proudest accomplishments was the annual Thomas Williams and Elliot Grayson Unity Award, given to individuals or groups fostering reconciliation and progress. The first recipient was Lizzie Foster, whose tireless efforts as a librarian and community leader had made Windmill Creek's transformation possible. As Windmill Creek gained national attention, a documentary crew arrived to capture its journey. The film, titled From Shadows to Light, The Windmill Creek Story, highlighted the town's painful past and its inspiring recovery. Interviews with residents, including Caroline Grayson, Lizzie Foster, and even some who initially resisted the changes, painted a complex but hopeful picture of reconciliation. Jack and Hannah's leadership became the focal point, showcasing the power of persistence and collective effort. During a town screening of the documentary, the community gathered under the open sky, watching their story unfold on a large outdoor screen. Cheers erupted as the film ended with the new sign above the store, "Williams and Grayson's Light, built by all for all." On a quiet afternoon, Hannah visited her father's grave for the first time in years. She carried a small bouquet of daisies, his favorite flower, and knelt by the headstone. "Dad," she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion, "I finally understand. You always believed in the good in people, even when it wasn't easy. I hope we've honored that." She placed a framed copy of his original letter, now weatherproofed, beside the flowers. The letter's final line, "We are stronger when we choose light over darkness," gleamed under the sun. Jack appeared behind her, carrying a small wooden plaque. Together, they placed it by the grave. It read, "In loving memory of Thomas Williams, a light that never dimmed." Back in town, a celebration was underway. The annual Legacy Festival had become a beloved tradition, drawing visitors from across the region. The festival featured music, food, and booths showcasing the town's progress, everything from the scholarship fund to Jack's vocational training programs. Hannah and Jack stood on a stage, addressing the crowd. "This isn't just about Windmill Creek," Hannah said, her voice carrying over the festive noise. "This is about what's possible when we choose to face our past and work together for a better future." Jack added, "Change isn't easy, but it's worth it, and it starts with each of us in our own communities." The crowd erupted in applause, their faces bright with shared pride and hope. As the evening wound down, Jack pulled Hannah aside, his expression soft but resolute. "I have something for you," he said, handing her a small leather-bound journal. Inside were handwritten entries, his thoughts, reflections, and plans for their future. On the first page was a simple dedication. "For Hannah, my partner, my light, my everything." Tears welled in her eyes as she embraced him. "You always know exactly what to say." "And you," he replied, his voice filled with warmth, "always know exactly what to do." Years later, Windmill Creek was unrecognizable from its former self. Streets were lined with thriving businesses, schools boasted higher graduation rates, and the town's spirit was alive and well. Hannah and Jack continued to work tirelessly, their bond growing stronger with every challenge they faced together. One day, they received a letter from Emily Carter. Now, a successful attorney, she wrote about her plans to return to Windmill Creek and establish a free legal clinic. Her words echoed Thomas's teachings, a testament to the enduring power of his legacy. Standing outside Williams and Grayson's light, Hannah looked at the sunset painting the sky in vibrant hues. Jack joined her, their hands intertwined. "We've come a long way," she said softly. Jack nodded, a content smile on his face. "And there's still so much to do." They watched as children played in the square, their laughter ringing out like a melody of hope. In the distance, the newly erected Unity Monument stood tall, inscribed with the words, "From shadows to light. Together, we rise." As the night settled over Windmill Creek, Hannah whispered to herself, "The past may cast long shadows, but together, we've built a brighter dawn." And with that, the lights of the town shone brighter than ever before, a legacy of resilience, unity, and unwavering hope. And so, Windmill Creek's story reminds us all, no matter how dark the past may seem, together we have the power to build a brighter future. But what about you? Have you ever faced a moment where forgiveness or courage changed everything? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your own stories of hope and resilience. If this journey inspired you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. There's so much more to explore. Stories that will touch your heart, challenge your perspective, and remind you of the strength we all carry. Stay with us as we uncover the next chapter of humanity's incredible story. See you soon.